Hey guys, Shah here. With Shadowlands right around the corner, it is time to start thinking about what path that we want to take when the expansion drops, what gear to look for, and how we're going to best optimize our character to perform how we want. So today we're going to look at the upcoming legendary powers that will be obtainable in Shadowlands. Every class will have access to 4 legendary powers for their class respectively, and there will be 4 for your spec, and then 4 that will be general powers that are going to be able to use across all specializations for your class. There are also a few legendary powers that are not class specific, and every player will be able to obtain them, but these are going to be very specific for certain types of content, and we are not going to be talking about these in this video. I'm going to be covering this as a pseudo tier list. I know there's a lot of negative connotations with tier lists in general, so instead of using your typical S through F tiers, I'm simply just going to rate these as a bottom tier, mid tier, and top tier, with there being a plethora of different powers to choose from, and even more situations where these legendaries can shine. It's hard to really pin down like a best in slots. I'm hoping that this list helps lay out why you may want to target a few specific legendaries before you target others. So let's just dive in. Before I talk about the powers though, I do want to establish how exactly I plan on determining which tier a legendary power will fall into. Let's start with our bottom tier, which doesn't exactly mean that they're like the worst legendaries, but that they are A, either underwhelming to use or there's a better option, B, they're only impactful in very niche forms of content, or C, that they will be great down the line once we can equip more than one legendary at a time. Obviously this is pure speculation, but it's a popular take on how the power curve is going to be laid out for the rest of the expansion, so we're hoping for that to come in a future patch. Secondly, we have our mid tier. These are going to be your stronger niched legendaries, which will be good for certain dungeons, raid fights, or PvP compositions, though they aren't necessarily like universally strong in all forms of content. Most likely you will be aiming to get a few of these depending on your playstyle or content progression, but not until you at least have a suitable legendary from a top tier. And then lastly, of course, we have our top tier, which is going to contain legendaries that work on several forms of content, and they have a large power spike for the class or specialization. I will talk about why each of these legendaries may or may not be used in different circumstances. You can actually take a look at the time track below. Each legendary is going to be laid out there, so if you wish to skip around, feel free to do so, but I do recommend suffering through this whole video since there is a lot of good information on my take on the different legendary powers. So let's jump in. So naturally, we're going to start with the bottom tier. So these, like I mentioned before, are legendaries you most likely won't choose first because there are going to be other options and other legendary choices that are just going to make more sense for the content you want to doing. They'll cover a wider range of content, and we're going to assume that down the line when we're able to equip 2 legendaries, these are going to be strong. It actually does pain me to put any legendaries in this category because I think most of them are fairly interesting. Whether it's a good interaction with the Guardian Druid toolkit, or it's just a good legendary that covers a lot more specs. So we're going to start off with Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse. So Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse is the first legendary power that I'm going to put in the bottom tier. Now, what this legendary power does is on a 45-second rotation, it's going to randomly cast a spell. Well, not randomly, it's predictable. It's every 45 seconds. And it's going to be based on whatever form you are in, whether that's bear form, cat form, human form, tribal form. It's going to cast the spell that is assigned. This can be semi-played around. I think the headache of playing around a 45-second cooldown timer is fairly underwhelming. It's not a big enough payoff for legendary actually to be used. Barkskin, while it is nice to have a 20% damage reduction, it's not like the most useful ability that the Guardian Druid would have access to. Like if it randomly casted Survival Instincts, that would make this a lot stronger of a legendary, but being Barkskin without being able to synergize with other legendaries or other really talents in general, it's just going to find itself in the bottom tier. This isn't the worst legendary to have for alternate specs. So if you're someone who likes to play all different specializations of Druid, this could be a legendary that is actually going to be semi-useful because for cat form it casts Primal Wrath. For healers, it'll cast Wild Growth. For Moonkins, it's going to cast Starfall. So like you're going to get a little bit of good AoE potential out of this legendary. But for Guardian Druids, Barkskin is just like it's underwhelming, I guess the best way to put it. So most likely you'll never want to actually use this or craft this legendary until, fingers crossed, we can have multiple legendaries, because I can see really cool synergies with this and Brambles and another legendary that we're going to talk about in a few seconds here. But the other legendary that I'm going to have to put here is Legacy of the Sleeper is the It's adding steroids to your Berserk and or Incarnation cooldown. It's insanely strong. It makes your Incarnation your God mode at this point. It increases your damage done. It gives you insane leech, 15%, and you're going to be immune to CC during the effective Incarnation. And on top of all of that, it's going to reduce the cooldown by 30 seconds. Now, why is it in the bottom tier if it's this powerful? Well, it has some friction with at least the Venthyr ability, which I might be a little biased against this because I really like the Venthyr ability. Putting it on a 2.5 minute cooldown means you either have to sit on the cooldown once it comes up for 30 seconds anyways to wait for it to line up with the Venthyr ability Ravenous Frenzy if you are a Venthyr. This is obviously a very specific example. On top of that, it's just, it's putting too much power into a certain cooldown that when this cooldown is not active, whether it's Berserker or Incarnation, you're going to feel very flimsy. Other legendary powers are going to give you either more offense or defense more often, like a higher uptime value than this legendary specifically. With that being said, there's also going to be other legendaries that are just going to overall do more damage and increase your survivability better than this legendary does. So putting all your eggs in one basket is what this does, and it's not something that we really want to do. I guess it could be okay in PvP maybe for some like good burst potential and that immunity aspect, but it's not going to be something that's going to be good until I can see probably further down the line, or maybe they rework it a little bit. But that's pretty much it for the bottom tier. There's nothing that's actually going to keep filling up this row. Most of the legendaries are going to find themselves in the mid tier or top tier. Like I said, these next couple legendaries are going to fall into a niche, and then the top tier are probably going to be the 2 legendaries you're probably going to want to aim for first, depending on your playstyle and what kind of content you plan on progressing. So that brings us right up to the mid tier. Now, what is going to fall into this category? We're actually going to have a few fall into this category. I'm going to start with Circle of Life and Death. This isn't a legendary that's necessarily extremely interactive. What it does is it just amplifies how fast your dots will tick. So essentially it's a 25% damage buff because it's going to be doing the same amount of damage, the periodic damage over a shorter period of time. So it's going to increase the damage of your Thrash and how many times it ticks. It's also going to increase the damage of your Moonfire and how many times it ticks. I really actually like this legendary. Like, putting in the mid tier feels weird. I'd like to put in the top tier, but I just don't think it provides any defensive value. What I like about this legendary, though, is it allows you to have faster and better aggro generation, or not aggro generation. It allows you to have better threat generation because of our Blood Frenzy talent in our very first row. If you take this, your dots are going to be ticking 25% faster, which means you're going to get 25% increased rage gen from this talent. Now, giving it 2 rage every time it ticks doesn't seem like a lot, but in a dungeon scenario or in a raid environment where there's ads and multiple things going on, having multiple Thrash ticking faster, giving you more damage over time, but also increasing your rage generation can really makes the playstyle extremely fast paced in those kind of environments. Because the damage is also ticking faster, if you take the Galactic Guardian talent as an option in your level 35 row, I think it is, they switched it up on me, so now I have no idea. If you take the Galactic Guardian talent, it's going to synergize really well because not only are your dots going to be ticking faster, but because your dots are ticking faster, there's a higher chance of you getting procs for the free Moonfire, which is going to increase your rage generation even further. So I really like this legendary. A little side note, it also synergizes well with the Adaptive Swarm, the Necrolord ability, and it just, again, makes it feel like a very fast-paced playstyle. So for those who really enjoy that build in particular, I did a video on it a while ago. I'll be doing a new build, hopefully in the next couple weeks here. This is going to be a legendary that you might actually want to pick up because it just looks really good. All right, what is next? So we're going to actually jump and talk about the Luffa-Infused Embrace. Now, this legendary was looking to be the meta play for Guardian Druids, especially in Mythic Plus. So essentially what it does is it's just increasing the radius of your Thrash, it increases the damage of your Thrash, and it allows it to stack up to 1 additional time. This is a solid legendary, but it's outshined by Ursoc's Fury Remembered in defensive value, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, which is a different legendary. But this can be used in both Raid and Mythic Plus since it has synergy with the Rend and Tear talent. Because it can stack up to 1 additional time, the Rend and Tear talent will essentially net gain you an 8% flat DR as long as you're maintaining Thrash on the target. So this can be a decent defensive option, but like I said, it's going to be outshined by other defensive legendaries. Though, down the road, this paired with Ursoc's Fury Remembered is going to be insanely strong, and I can't wait to mess around with that. Next, we have Oath of the Elder Druid. So this is more of a kind of equip it and forget it legendary. Essentially, it's going to increase the potency of your affinities by 75%. So as a Guardian Druid player, you're automatically getting Thick Hide, which is a flat 6% damage reduction. Being increased by 75%, it's going to give you an additional 3% or 4%, net gaining you a total of just a flat 10% damage reduction, or an additional 4% if you want to look at it like that. So defensive value passively is really good, and depending on what you choose in your affinity talent row, you're also going to have that benefit, whether it's increased attack range, increased movement speed, or the Ysera's Gift, which is more than likely what you're going to be taking. The Ysera's Gift healing is going to be increased as well. So both of these together net gain you a little bit more damage reduction, as well as a little bit passive healing for your overall survivability and healing throughput. Now, this legendary is going to be outshined by other legendaries, of course, that offer more value or a higher skill ceiling. The skill aspect of this legendary will be tracking the Heart of the Wild procs and capitalizing on those Heart of the Wild procs. So the other half of this legendary will give you Heart of the Wild for 10 seconds. So making sure you're keeping track of this as you shift forms will allow you to really capitalize on increasing your healing for your raid group or your Mythic Plus group, or capitalizing on damage. So what's cool about this legendary is it can be used in most types of content, since it benefits across the board pretty well. You're most likely going to see this shine a little bit more in the raid encounter. Last in the mid tier is going to be the Draft of Deep Focus. Now, if you pay attention to WoWHead, or if you read a lot of guides, you're going to see a lot of people kind of saying that this is going to be your best in slot raid legendary. I disagree with this, and that's why I'm putting in the mid tier. I don't think it's going to be the strongest choice for a raiding Guardian Druid right off the bat, and there's a few reasons why. It is simming very high, so what it does is it's increasing the damage of your Moonfire periodic effect, as long as it's on one target, by 40%. The issue I have with this legendary is that as soon as you add a secondary target, you either have to make sure you're keeping track of how many Moonfires you have out, which is 1, preferably, whichever target you're trying to kill, or whatever target you're attacking, or you just have to kind of like, once there's a second target, the legendary is pretty much useless. And that's kind of my biggest gripe with this, is there's no cancel aura macro for the dots that you have out. There's no way to remove them. So if another target comes in and you accidentally Moonfire, or you want to switch to a priority target, you can't just switch automatically, which makes this legendary feel pretty bad to play with. It also devalues a talent and a build with Galactic Guardian in multi-target fights. So as soon as you introduce new targets and your Thrash Blades are ticking and you're swiping and whatnot and doing AoE damage, you're going to see a very large amount of DPS loss while equipped with this legendary. And again, it doesn't really provide any defensive value either. And that's why I'm putting this in the mid tier. Simming, or for progression on some single target fights, it's going to be really strong. But outside of that, I don't think it's going to be the best choice for you. I recommend picking up a legendary that's going to have both an offensive and defensive value to it. I think, though, down the line, for people who are looking to parse, or those real good min-maxers who know the toolkit well enough, can pick up this legendary probably to start for some early raid progression to get some good numbers out. But outside of that, I don't recommend this, because it's not going to be good really for dungeons at all, and it's not going to be great for PvP either. And so that's kind of where my head is at for this. And with that, we are wrapping it up. We are now moving to our last two legendaries, which are both going to find a spot in the top tier. But we're going to start with Ursoc's Fury Remember. Now, this is the talk of the town right now, this legendary power. So what does it do? In its original design, it would have a 15% chance to proc Thrash upon thrashing. So it had a semi chance to kind of like duplicate itself. If you're familiar with Shaman's Mastery, it's similar to that. It just has a chance of duplicating. When they reworked this legendary, they added that every time you damage with Thrash, 75% of that damage is going to be added as an absorption shield to you. So it's extremely, extremely effective leech. A thing to note about this legendary is when you Thrash, if you still have some of your absorption shield left, it's going to add to that absorption shield and not replace it. So in moments of big burst damage and using Incarnation with maybe the Venthyr ability, for example, you're going to have a net gain of like doubling your health pool because of the amount of damage you're able to put out before taking all that damage and eating away at the absorption shield. This legendary is going to absolutely shine in the Mythic Plus environment, and it's going to be pretty good for some niche raid encounters, because Thrash is part of your base rotation as a Guardian Druid in general, and you're going to want to keep your Thrash stacks applied to your raid target. This also could be decent at single target. It's obviously going to have a lot lower value because it's only hitting one target, for example, on single target fights. So there might be another legendary you might want to equip instead of this one. But whenever you throw into a second or third target and more, this legendary is going to increase in value dramatically. And this is going to be my go-to legendary probably to start as a Guardian Druid, though I do have to keep in mind personally that I'm going to be playing other specs as well. All right, and last but not least, I know I probably talked about them in the wrong order. This one is a lot more hyped, but the Natural Order's Will is the last legendary we're going to be talking about here. So what this does is it is an absolute boost to your bark skin, which feels really, really good to play with. It increases your bark skin's damage reduction up to 35%, so it increases it by 15% damage reduction, obviously. It also nets you about 100 rage value. And what I mean by this is that it's going to give you an iron fur at the beginning and the end of the bark skin. So as soon as you use the bark skin, it's going to give you an iron fur. And when your bark skin rages, it's going to give you an iron fur. As on top of that, it's also going to automatically cast a frenzied regen at the start and at the end. So for the first 3 seconds of bark skin, it's going to stabilize your health pool by giving you a 35% damage reduction, adding iron fur stack, plus healing you for whatever damage you're missing. And then at the very end, to finish you off, it's going to extend by another 3 seconds, because that's the active time of frenzied regeneration. It's going to basically extend the length of your bark skin every time it's used. So instead of being essentially like a 12-second cooldown, it's going to trail off a little bit in defensive value, but it's going to be a 15-second cooldown. So it increases the uptime from being 20% to being 25%, which is just really good. And on top of that, it's essentially granting you 100 free rage every minute. Now, the cool part about this is that it has really good synergy with a conduit. You're going to be able to reduce the cooldown of your bark skin. You can do this in no matter what soulbind you pick, as long as you get the right conduit in your soulbind tree. It's going to reduce the cooldown to 50 seconds, and you're going to be able to rank this up to have even a bigger cooldown on your bark skin. And hopefully, like I mentioned before, with Lycara's Fleeting Grasp or Glimpse, we're going to have some crazy synergy in the future with some crazy cool bark skin builds, maybe incorporating brambles. I'm really excited to see where this legendary takes us. Now, the unfortunate part about this legendary is that it really doesn't offer you or doesn't net you any additional offensive power, but the defensive value of this legendary in particular is absolutely insane, and I can't wait to play it on live. So that is my tier list for these legendaries. So just some final thoughts about the legendaries. This tier list isn't necessarily going to be, you have to choose this one and you should never choose these. You obviously have to do some own research, figure out what playstyle you want to build, and what kind of content you plan on doing, at least in the early part of the expansion. The idea is that you're eventually going to be able to buy all these. You're eventually going to be able to have all of the legendaries in your toolkit. So this isn't necessarily about, okay, you have to pick one. There shouldn't really be anxiety around this decision. You just have to decide yourself which legendary is going to suit your playstyle. And that's like my biggest recommendation. So I wanted to really release this video and just talk about it, because Shadowlands is obviously coming up. I just wanted to kind of talk about where the legendaries are sitting to kind of give you maybe a couple guidelines on how you should choose your legendary and the power that you want to have. So I do want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I want to have some discussion in the comment section below about maybe why I'm wrong, maybe why I'm right, some of the builds that you've maybe seen or you feel like you're excited to play with, and let's just have some cool, fun discourse down in the comment section below. I don't plan on doing this for any other tanks. Guardian Druid is kind of my bread and butter. It's something that I've been playing for a fairly long time, and I'm going to continue playing it into Shadowlands, where other tanks, I play them, but I'm not as invested. So this is mainly for those Guardian Druid lovers out there. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.